Do you want to write a book, but you don't know where to start? Follow along while I teach you the process that will save you time and money. Stories don't spawn perfectly out of thin air. They take a lot of time and planning. They go through several steps before they're beautifully complete. Whether you want to write a book for the first time or you're trying to smooth out the process, here are 6 steps to writing a book. Number 1 is outlining. Yes, pantsers, you do want to do some sort of outlining. In case you don't know the difference between plotters and pantsers, we'll cover that real quick. A plotter is someone that loves the outlining process. They plan everything out. They might have graphs, they have plot charts before they start writing it down. I'll tell you a secret, a not so secret secret. I am a heavy plotter. But if you are a pantser, someone who writes by the seat of their pants, and plotting may sound like a horrible chore for you, or outlining, or what I hear a lot is that a lot of writers, if they plot it out, it ruins the fun for them and they're no longer interested in writing the story. So no matter what camp you fall into, you're going to want some sort of outline. So if you're a heavy plotter like me, you'll figure out every plot point, every character arc, and every scene before you actually sit down to write. I find that having a detailed outline creates a more comprehensive story that saves me a lot of time in developmental edits. But if you find that plot charts aren't your thing, you might be a pantser. Even if this is your preferred way to write, you do want some sort of loose outline to guide you. You want to at least include the major story beats, where the story starts and where it ends. This will help you from wandering off too far and having to do massive revisions during step 3. Step 2, the rough draft. This is the fun part. You get to take your outline and get writing. Don't worry about how pretty the story is or how beautifully the words flow at this point. Your goal is to simply get the story down. Some people like to edit as they go, but I have found that for most people, this doesn't work well. They get stuck in a cycle of revisions. So even if you feel this horrible need to go back and polish your ugly first draft as you're going, give it a chance to try to resist it and go all the way through without going back to do revisions. The only time during the rough draft process that I would go back to do any sort of heavy revisions is if you get to a certain point and you're like, oh, I need to redo this scene onward because it changes everything about the story going forward. That would be really the only time I would go back and redo those kind of revisions during the rough draft process. But overall, try to save the editing for the next step. Otherwise, you might find yourself in a constant loop of editing and never actually finishing the story. So, biggest advice here, don't worry about how bad your writing is at this stage. Don't think you're a hack. You're not a real writer, because every first draft is going to be terrible. All right, stage 3 of writing. This is called the developmental, the content, or substantive editing. I prefer to call it developmental editing, so that's what I'm going to use going forward. This is going to be your first phase of editing. You aren't going to be worried about word choices or punctuation or typos really at this point. Combing through your manuscript for all of this will be a waste of time at the developmental stage. What you're really looking for are story beats, character arcs, and overall scenes. So odds are at the developmental stage, you're going to be rewriting whole scenes, chapters, even sections of your book, depending on how detailed you were in the outline. So if you're going back and you're trying to change word choices at this point, you're wasting time because you might end up deleting or rewriting that whole scene. Why it's called developmental editing is because we were trying to make sure that the story develops well. Does each scene flow into the next? Does the narrative keep its promises? Is the story satisfying, and does it start and end well? If you do heavy plotting, you'll most likely do very minimal developmental edits. But if you're a pantser, expect to do most of your work at this stage, because this is where you're going to cut all the extra gunk or add in scenes to help make it flow. After you've done your own developmental edits, this is a good spot to get an alpha reader. For more information on alpha reading, check out my video on alpha versus beta readers. Step 4, line editing. Once your story is solid and it flows well story beat wise, it's time to clean up those sentences and paragraphs. This is the stage of editing where you'll go through to make sure that sentences flow well, paragraphs make sense. You want to make sure that you're showing instead of telling, and that your word choices are sublime. Depending on how experienced you are as a writer will determine how long you spend at this stage. If you have a lot of technical skills that you're still developing, you'll be here likely longer than if you are already very experienced at writing. This will be just a kind of tweaking and making things flow a bit better. Stage 5, copy editing. This is line editing's less glamorous cousin. Once the words flow beautifully, then it's time for your copy edits. This stage isn't as glamorous or as rewarding, but it does determine how professional your manuscript is. Many people confuse line editing with copy editing, and I'll be honest, I was confused about it for a long time. So while copy editing does tweak some sentences to make sure they aren't confusing, they're not as deep as line editing. For copy editing, you're also going to break out your style sheet. You're going to check your grammar, fix typos, look for things like hyphens, capitalizations, fine-tune any confusing sentences, and ensure spelling is consistent throughout the manuscript. This is especially important if you're writing sci-fi or fantasy and you have unusual names for places or items. And stage 6, proofreading. Congratulations, you've made it to the end of writing your manuscript. You're happy with your story, the words flow beautifully, and it looks professional. Now you just need to look for any missed typos or spelling errors. You shouldn't be changing anything about your book at this point. You're just doing some last-minute cleanups. And here's a bonus tip for you guys. If doing heavy editing, especially in the developmental editing stage, sounds like a nightmare to you, like it does to me, you're going to want to plot more. I recommend you make a detailed plot chart. A plot chart will let you address the plot and story beat issues before you start writing. You'll be able to smooth it all out and make sure that every narrative promise is going to be answered. But if you don't mind rewriting, feel free to pants it. But either way, the big rule here is you're either going to do a lot of your work up front on the plot chart, or you're going to do a lot of your work in the developmental editing stage. You're gonna have to pick your poison. Remember, when you're going through the 6 steps of writing, each stage builds on the other, and you do not want to move on to the next stage until you're happy with the first one. So if you aren't happy with your developmental edits, you're going to waste time and money, potentially money if you're hiring an editor, by doing line edit. So make sure you complete these in each step before moving on to the next one. If you're interested in learning more about the stages of writing and in more depth, make sure you subscribe. I'm going to be going in depth on each stage of writing, and next week I will be talking about plotting, and I will show you guys how I plot. And if you like my material, please don't forget to like and comment as well as subscribe. That all helps small content creators like myself get more notice.